I wanted to talk to everybody about creating a culture of inclusion. And doesn't that just sound really nice, sort of like free mimosas or world peace? And there are a couple of reasons that this is important to me. In my past lives, I've been a queer activist, a social justice educator, an out gay man, and somebody who just cares about humanity. But then I became a father. And now these two little delightful children drive everything that I do and have me thinking about what I can be doing to make the world a better place for them. Because, let's face it, we live in a world where people are treated differently because of who they are and how they look. People like to say that we live in a colorblind society or that we've moved beyond seeing race, but often the people who are saying those things aren't the people who experience racism on a daily basis. We've all seen headlines about how tech has a diversity problem, and many of us in the room have probably felt it in one way or another. Whether you've personally experienced discrimination or feeling left out, or you've just looked around your organization and noticed, wow, everybody here looks just like me. Or conversely, nobody here looks like me. According to research from Glassdoor, 67% of job seekers consider workplace diversity an important factor when they're evaluating employment opportunities. And more than 50% of employees want their workplace to do more to increase diversity. What we know is that just getting more people in the room with different characteristics isn't enough. It's a start, don't get me wrong, and we need to be looking at that. But we also need to take a hard look at the culture and what we're doing or not doing to be truly inclusive. When I talk about a culture of inclusion, I mean a place where the organizational customs, beliefs, and actions truly honor and welcome all individuals, where factors like race, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability status, mental health, body shape and size, religion, ethnic and social background, socioeconomic status, where all of these things don't prevent someone from being truly included and fully involved. A place where people aren't just invited in, but are truly made a part of the organization. It's about creating a sense of belonging. So today, I want to suggest to you some things that you can do to help create that culture in your own organizations. The first thing is just be yourself. You are valuable. You bring a unique set of talents and perspectives to your organization. And you should feel comfortable bringing all the aspects of your identity to work with you. When we are all our whole, authentic selves, that makes it easier for others to do the same. And if we're going to truly value difference, we have to make it visible. When our culture is truly inclusive, the parts of our identity that make us unique become common and ordinary rather than strange or exotic. For example, I talk about my husband at work in casual conversations just as much as my my coworkers talk about their opposite sex partners. It should be completely normal to ask for an adjusted work schedule because you're fasting during Ramadan. We all need to feel comfortable expressing ourselves to feel safe and included. Last year, I attended the HashiConf conference, and while I was there, I heard a HashiCorp engineer talking about how he unintentionally triggered a movement within the organization that led to the creation of pride stickers and other swag just because he asked for it. He wanted to be visible as a queer person in tech, and by doing so, he created a space that made it easier for others to be visible as well. It's not always easy, especially if you feel like you're the only person like you. But sometimes I think you'll be surprised what you'll find when you ask. Now, if you work at an organization that doesn't respect you for who you are, try to find allies within the organization who can help you bring about the change necessary to create a more inclusive culture. And if that doesn't work, it might be time to find a different organization that will respect you for who you are. Now, for some of us, that's much easier said than done. I know that I'm speaking from a place of privilege as a cis white male, pretty established in my career, and not everyone can take those kinds of risks. The second thing you can do is be mindful of the words you use every day. Now, I'm not talking about political correctness. I'm talking about being aware of the language that you use and how it may impact people around you. For starters, try using gender-neutral terms. Now, here in the South, y'all have the perfectly usable gender-neutral term. You can use it all the time. I have a coworker from California who calls everybody dude or bro. Every sentence either starts with dude or ends with bro. And he's trying hard to change, but like any other habit, it's hard to break. Or take my husband as an example, whose father taught him that the polite way to address a group of women is to say ladies. But that can be perceived as diminutive or condescending, and you also don't know if everyone in the group actually identifies as a lady. And there are lots of alternatives, and it takes practice. I encourage you to try it out while you're here at the conference. But you have to give yourself permission to make mistakes, because what matters is the trying. That's what signals, hey, I get it, and I'm working on being more inclusive. It's not about being perfect and getting it right all the time. I recently gave this talk at another conference, and I went back and watched the video, and I noticed that the first thing I said when I walked on stage was, hey guys. So even it's okay to stop and correct yourself, even mid-sentence. And that opens up the opportunity for further dialogue. I can't talk about gender-inclusive language without also mentioning pronouns. It's kind of a hot topic at the moment. We need to respect how people choose to identify. And it's another opportunity to make things more visible. I've started including my pronouns in my email signature, my Twitter bio. When everyone is explicit about their pronouns, including people whose gender isn't typically called into question, it actually makes it more comfortable for someone who identifies as non-binary or someone whose presentation might not match their pronouns to self-identify and ask to be called what they want to be called. The third thing you can do is avoid making assumptions. Get to know people as individuals and treat them as such. You are a complete, complex person with a multifaceted identity, and so are all of your coworkers. Try not to rely on stereotypes based on someone's appearance or background and let those determine how you interact with them. At the end of the day, we're all individuals with our own unique blend of nature and nurture that governs how our personalities manifest. When we start treating some people differently or excluding them, we miss out on the value that they bring to our organizations. A good friend of mine, Vernon Wall, who does talks on diversity, talks about the tape recorder that's playing in your head. Now, for you youngins in the room who don't know what that is, think about a Spotify playlist. These are the messages that are playing in our heads that we picked up as we were growing up, from our families, our school, our church, wherever. These are the things that you noticed, even subconsciously. Maybe you observed how people were treated differently based on how they looked or where they were from, or even explicit messages, like being told that a particular group of people are lazy or women belong in the kitchen. All of these messages were recorded on a track in your head, and it's constantly playing in the background. So when you see someone who looks a certain way walking down the street, just without thinking about it, you're calling on those messages and making assumptions about that person. And we call that unconscious bias. It's really hard to undo that programming because it's often rooted in fears, superstitions, ignorance, and usually the people we got those messages from were the people we grew up trusting and believing more than anybody else. My husband talks about the messages he got from his mother, and her contention was that anybody who doesn't like animals are bad people, and men who wear pinky rings can't be trusted. You know, there might be some truth in some of those, but Andrew knows that this is all balderdash, but the unconscious bias is still there on some level. This is also something you can undo. It requires a lot of self-awareness. It can be helpful to ask your friends and colleagues to tell you what they think the biases that you have are. Having open and honest conversations about the biases other people see in us can reveal our blind spots and help us work on them. This is something else you can work on while you're here at the conference. Try to notice when you're making an assumption about somebody based on how they look and somebody that you don't know, and think about where are those messages coming from? According to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, about 1 in 5 adults in the US experience some form of mental illness in a given year. Some mental illnesses are more debilitating than others, but the reality is that most of us will be impacted by our mental health at some point or another. Now, this can range from illnesses like depression and anxiety to neurodevelopmental disorders like learning disorders or autism. The fourth thing you can do is to practice empathy and compassion with your coworkers who might be struggling with any of these issues. For most of us, our jobs are stressful. Now, it's usually a positive kind of stress that challenges us to improve and get better at our work, but we need to understand that we all come to work with different experiences and different needs. For me, standing up here doing public speaking is stressful. I mean, just check my heart rate monitor. But for someone with anxiety, it can be really hard. Educate yourself about the signs that someone might be struggling, and think about ways that you might be able to reach out. Find ways that work for you. You don't need to be a therapist or have a degree in counseling just to check in with somebody who might be struggling and see if they need help. Just asking a simple question lets somebody know that you care about them. And it's probably best not to try to give advice yourself, but rather help someone find the resources that they need. There's a great organization called Open Sourcing Mental Illness. They have lots of great resources on their website. Right after this talk, Aaron's going to come up here and talk even more about mental health, so pay attention to that as well. Talking openly about mental health can help to reduce the stigma around it and contribute to a more inclusive culture. I tell pretty much anybody who will listen that between my husband and me, we see 2 individual therapists and a couples therapist every month. And make sure to take time for self-care as well. We all know that burnout is a real thing. If your company allows for mental health days or has unlimited PTO, take advantage of those days when you need them, and be as open as you feel comfortable with your supervisor about your needs. The fifth thing you can do is pay attention to the people in your organization whose voices and perspectives might be being marginalized. It's likely not even intentional. How often have you been sitting in a room, in a meeting, and your female colleague presents an idea, 2 minutes later, a male colleague says exactly the same thing, and everybody's like, oh, you're brilliant, you're a genius, thank you. Happens all the time, right? Those of us with privilege have a responsibility to take notice and do something about it. So the next time that female colleague presents something, chime in with, hey, that sounds interesting, tell us more. We can't expect someone who's being marginalized to always be able to advocate for themselves. If you have colleagues who you think might not be feeling included, check in with them and see how they're doing. And think about ways that you can be an ally. It's important to have a working environment that's accessible to individuals with physical disabilities, but creating a welcoming space goes further than that. Go beyond thinking about accommodation and instead look at inclusive design, which focuses on making environments universally accessible and looks beyond disability. Think about someone who has different needs from you and what they might need, and make that the norm rather than an exception that someone has to request. That not only helps the person who may need that accommodation, it's also a clear signal of inclusion. Make your slide decks and websites that are easy to read by people with low vision. Provide trainings and workshops in a variety of modes for people with different learning styles. And it's not just about disabilities. Encourage your company to create lactation rooms, nap rooms, prayer and meditation rooms to make your space more welcoming for everyone. The goal is to make sure that everyone is able to fully participate. At a conference I was at earlier, they were announcing what the lunch options were, and there was a chicken sandwich on a whole wheat wrap and roast beef on brioche, and it sounded all lovely, and then they were like, and then we have some vegetarian option. Later in the day, I was talking with one of the attendees who had the vegetarian option, and she said that she should have known from the dismissive way they were talking about it that she should have left and found herself something else to eat. I can tell you that she was not feeling very included that day. If you're involved in the hiring process in your organization, take a critical look at your processes. How diverse are the individuals in the candidate pool? How could you actively reach out to some candidates that have traditionally been underrepresented? Find organizations in your area that are working with underrepresented populations. Remember that unconscious bias we were talking about before? Be especially mindful of it in your interview process. For example, there's research that indicates that individuals with ethnic sounding names in Western countries are less likely to even be selected for an interview because of the name on their resume than those with Western sounding names. Notice when you're evaluating candidates differently based on their identity. If you see a female candidate exhibit the same behavior as a male candidate, do you view them differently? Make sure that your evaluation criteria are objective and consider having anti-bias training for your recruiting teams and hiring managers. And then after hiring, do you have clear objectives and explicit criteria for promotions and reviews? A lack of clearly defined expectations make it really easy for the unconscious bias to slip back in. Often at conferences like this, we have codes of conduct. You probably got an email about it before the conference. And these codes of conduct call out the behavior that's acceptable and not acceptable. Encourage your organization to have a code of conduct too, and make it public. People who have experienced harassment or are concerned about experiencing harassment are more likely to join your organization if they feel it's going to be a safe place for them, where harassment won't be tolerated. The 2018 Women in the Workplace report found that only 27% of employees say that their managers regularly challenge biased language and behavior when they see it. Only 40% say that disrespectful behavior toward women is quickly addressed in their company. And only 32% think their company swiftly acts on claims of sexual harassment. But it's not just about sexual harassment either. Don't tolerate jokes about mental disorders or biased language about women, racial groups, LGBT people, anything. When you see behavior that's inappropriate or disrespectful, speak up. Change won't come if we're all silent. Finally, take the time to learn about the experiences of people who are different from you. Look for books, podcasts, blog posts from a variety of perspectives. You can download these slides later on, and I have links at the end with some resources that you can look at as a starting point. And I was recently reading a thread on Twitter about how I can make myself less of a clueless white person without asking people of color to do the work of educating me. And the suggestion is, go follow 50 people of color on social media. You can do it on your phone right now. I see you all have your phones out anyway. And just listen. You don't need to comment or even retweet. Just listen. And you can do this with any identity that's different from your own. So that's it. We've solved the problem, right? Seriously, these are my ideas of things that you can do today to help make yourself and your organization more inclusive. Hopefully you found something helpful here. But remember that this is a journey that we're all on together, and none of us are perfect or have all the answers. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. Please check out this link to give me your feedback and download the slides. If you don't get the Pearl Jam reference in the URL, I can't help you. Thank you for being here today, and enjoy the rest of the conference.